welcome. Today we're in the studio, Mr. Bill Westfall. Bill, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, excited to have you. So we're going to do a book review today on, Bill?
Well, this one is called The Abilene Paradox. Abilene Paradox.
Okay. Abilene Paradox by Harvey. So this is one of Bill's picks, one of his favorites, and he's going to walk us through kind of how he stumbled into it, what it really meant to him, and how he's utilized it and applied it over the years. So
I do thank you, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Harvey was one of my favorite authors, and I want to qualify this because this book was written in 1988.
Oh, okay.
So if we do the math on that,
quite a while ago,
35 years ago.
Yeah.
And yet in our own teachings, I have some books that are 100 years of age.
Yeah.
Because they are timeless, and I think if we're wise, we realize, because I think we as a people have a tendency sometimes to be kind of faddish. We turn, like Sun Tzu's Art of War in the 90s, that became a fad.
That's starting to come back. Have you noticed that?
That we just cycle these things. And so the idea is not to let these things, because there's wonderful wisdom of lessons in here.
Sure.
He was a professor of organizational theory, basically, and he's written more than one book. But there was a kind of a compilation of chapters of wisdom, and every one of those had a great point that he made about organizational kind of culture. And this one in particular, if I can take you back.
Sure.
He's a Texas kid.
Okay.
So I always ask people, how many have ever been to Texas in July and August? And what did you learn from that? And most people say, don't go to Texas in July and August.
It's really hot.
And he's down there with his in-laws. He's a professor, so he's got the summers off, and he says they're playing dominoes. And he said they're about their fourth or fifth game of dominoes on a hot, sultry, screened-in porch, when his father-in-law looked up to him and said, well, how would you like to run up to Abilene tonight at the cafeteria and have dinner? Well, let me tell you why he doesn't want to go, and some of you can relate to this. Mostly it's back roads and they're gravel. You got an old Buick that's got no air conditioning in it.
And this is what year?
And this is probably 50, 60. Well, I mean, when he wrote this book, no, it might be 1970s, somewhere along there. Yeah, but it's certainly years ago. And
it sounds like the car may be a little older than that even.
Well, and yes. And if you've ever been on a gravel road in the summertime with no air conditioning, that's not an experience, especially in Texas. So he said he didn't really want to go, but he thought his father-in-law wanted to go. Yeah. So he kind of turned to his wife and said, well, do you want to go? And down deep, as it turns out, she doesn't either, but she thought they wanted to go. So finally they took to their mother-in-law, and she said, well, we were just going to have leftovers tonight. So these four adults in a family that communicates and has respect and love of each other climb into a car and go off to Abilene. 100 miles round trip, most of that gravel roads. He said we had a dinner, gave most of us near Tomaine. He said we came back in, everybody's grumpy and tired, and his father-in-law, he said, turned around as I walked in, put his finger in my face and said, well, why in the hell did you want to go to Abilene? I quote. Yeah. And anyway, and he goes, me? I didn't want to go. I thought you wanted to go. And he said, no, I just threw that on the table. I didn't think you all were going to take me up on that. So what do you? So
you're saying that he thinks they want to go. So he puts the offer out, and they feel pressured by the offer, even though they don't want to go. They think he wants to go. So they say yes. And now the three of them go to grandma, it sounds like, their mother-in-law. And she's like, sure, I don't want to cook. Let's go.
And then they get back and realize that none of them wanted to do, so that's what they call it the Abilene Paradox. They've gone off and done something not one of them wanted to do. So the dynamic of that is, of course, he's an organizational kind of a guy. He looked at that to see, well, what's going on there? And he was able to relate that to several incidents, and one of them being an organization he was working with that was on a project that was basically bankrupting the company. And he went from the president to the R&D sections to the people that were involved in it. Every one of them knew that it was going to fail because the technology was not there to support it. But rather than acknowledge that, they're allowing the company to be bankrupt. And why do people do that? Well, here's where he kind of flew in the face, I think, of because people call it sometimes, well, it's peer pressure, or he said, and I really believe this, and it depends on the organizations too, because sometimes it's stronger than others, but it's the fear of exclusion from the group. As the word, if you don't agree with them, then they may exclude you in some fashion. Now, what's the solution to this? Well, it's another chapter in the book, basically. And this one he calls the gunsmoke phenomenon. And he gives you a picture of this, is that this is the old western town again where they've got somebody that's been arrested for doing something, and the mob has come to the marshal and decide they want to take him out and hang him. And what you see there is really, in fact, he did a video of this as well too. But the marshal comes out and he says, there'll be no hanging in Abilene tonight. Yeah. And the crowd's outnumbering, of course. And finally he draws a line in the sand, okay? And he says, all right, first man across that line, he says, I'm going to blow his head off. Well, what he realized with that comment, they looked around at each other and there's nobody willing to be the first man across the line. Yeah. But he's making the group take accountability for the decision they're about to make. And now they reconsider. So what he says, there has to be somebody on the team that has the courage to stand up and say, no, this is not the route that we need to take. Pause. Yes. And one of the ways we can do that with some confidence is when we have a leadership and a culture that has set those lines and those that culture sets its values and its vision and what its intent is and what its expectations are and what it's trying to accomplish. Then I have confidence that I can step up to do that. And what I've learned over the years, if just one person does that, oftentimes the others will speak up. You see that?
I can see that. Yeah. So it sounds like this is really a story that illustrates this groupthink. It's kind of what the textbooks call it, right? Groupthink situation, and people many a times not only struggle with having those conversations, but questioning those decisions, that if we do it in the right way, not only can we learn for ourselves what everyone's thinking, but maybe we can help the people making those decisions vet other options and the details for it.
And then you get to realizing there's a lot more people sitting around that table thinking in the manner that you are. But it opens up, he calls them an agreement manager. If somebody has to step up and formulate that actually we're in agreement here, and we don't have to feel excluded, and give us the courage to do that.
So it's kind of like that sheep theory, like you're just, are you a sheep in the flock, or are you going to be a shepherd type of mindset?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And so as you go through the book, so this is one story, and then you said there's another chapter that gives you the answer.
Gunsmoke phenomenon.
Okay, then what else does it include?
Oh, there's another one in our love. It's called the Gsell defense. Okay. And it's a great story about a Japan Airlines flight that about 67 or 68, landed a mile and a half short of the runway in the San Francisco Bay. Oh, okay. And it just, of course, you can imagine the media overwhelmed by that and the publicity that it got, international incident. I understand attorneys were flocking there because they said San Francisco was one of their favorite towns, knowing that this tension over this blame would go on forever. Yeah. And so they subpoenaed, and it turned out the captain of the aircraft from Japan was named Gsell. Yeah. Captain Gsell. And so they subpoenaed them, they got their hearing set up, and the first question they posed to him is they said, Captain Gsell, you've got over 10,000 hours, which you did, flying a Boeing 707. How in the world, having made this flight from Japan, Tokyo, to San Francisco and back several times, could you land an aircraft a mile and a half short of the runway? And he said that the Captain Gsell said, well, as you Americans would say, Captain Gsell simply, and he dropped the F-bomb on him, okay? Exclaiming English is a second language and the nuances of our profanity. Sure. But the mouths flew open, not so much as a shock of the profanity, as it was the shock that the captain took responsibility at the critical moment. And the moment he did that, he diffuses tension over blame so they can get on with a solution. Yeah. And what he says, and I think this is pretty subtle but very powerful, then the leader is also teaching his people, because he's asking basically for grace. He's teaching them to extend grace to him, forgive him. He's made an honest mistake. Sure. We're going to learn from this and we're going to move forward. In fact, he actually calls that organizational grace. So there's some powerful chapters in that book. That's just 3 of them that I can name offhand.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I like that story. We talked about previously about that whole extreme ownership that Jocko Willink calls it. But what happens in those situations when you remove the need for blame because you are taking accountability? You know, we've talked about the longevity of situations or controversies, if you will, that when we're blaming and we're denying responsibility or accountability, how long that can go on and last, and how long the spotlight stays on that person, compared to a situation like that where they give you the explanation and just say, hey, we fell short, and here's why, and here's what we'll do to fix it in the future.
That's exactly what happened there. There was so little damage to the aircraft. There was no injury to personnel. They wrapped that thing up in 2 weeks, and I understand the attorneys had to eat the leases on the apartments that they had been leasing for over a year, thinking it would probably go on for well over a year as well, too. So it's well worth the read.
Yeah, if we could just start applying that daily, right, and get people to understand the power of that and what that really does, that would be awesome.
I would agree.